Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country, around the world, happy summer, happy Pride, happy Independence Day week. It is a wild fucking time in America, a wild time in the world. And I am very happy to bring to you a guest that I admire, that I think is a rising star in America and beyond, and is a perfect person to take us through a variety of stuff happening in this moment. I'm proud to finally welcome the great and powerful Lindsay Church to Independent Americans. Welcome, Lindsay.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul. I'm glad to be here.
So we talk a lot about what's going on in the world. And I think you're a rock star. I think you're a rising star. And that's one of the reasons why I'm excited to talk to you. But let's start in the moment with the question I ask everyone, because I see a 12th man jersey over your shoulder. Where are you and how are you?
I am in Seattle, Washington. I am probably just like everybody else in the world, a little confused, a little hurt, and a little numb. It's been a wild time to be alive, as you said, and just glad to be breathing.
Yeah, the alternative sucks, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So I want to get into the breaking news about Torres versus Texas Department of Safety, the Supreme Court decision. I want to talk about Roe. I want to talk about the January 6 hearings. I want to talk about all of it. But let's talk about you for a second, because you're a person that I think is rising to this moment. How did you get to this moment? How did you become an activist leading an advocacy organization in the middle of this crazy time and world?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. So I'm the co-founder and executive director of Minority Veterans of America. We started in 2017. What I like to call Trump's greatest hits. 2017 was the first Women's March, mass mobilizations in the street. It was also the Muslim ban. It was also the trans ban. We started 12 days after the military trans ban. I myself am a LGBTQ veteran and served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Myself and my co-founder both had been involved in the veteran community through Student Veterans of America. I was the commander of an American Legion post. And let me tell you, that was as toxic as you would imagine. After the trans ban, I think there was a moment of like, I've had enough, you've had enough. My co-founder is a Korean American woman veteran. Between the two of us, we knew something had to change and that we had more power, but that we were living in fractured communities. And the veteran community is very fractured in a lot of ways, but identity related, it's really toxic for racial and ethnic minorities, women, LGBTQ folks, and religious and non-religious minorities. What we started to understand is that we have more power than they allow us to think that we do, because there are communities that exist for one pocket of minority groups, right? That like there's groups that serve racial and ethnic minorities. There are groups that serve women. There are groups that serve LGBTQ folks and religious minorities. And they're so small that we can't create this collective action movement. And so in 2017, via text message, because, you know, the millennials, what else? Millennials start organizations through a text message with a swear word in it and said, actually, I think we could do something here. I will never understand what it feels like to live in your body, and you will never understand what it feels like to live in mine. But what we do understand is marginalization and oppression, whether it be in service or after service. And that if we come together to create this collective action movement, we actually might be able to move the needle. And so in 2017, 12 days after the trans ban, after the Muslim ban, after the first modern, restrictions on abortions, we came together and said, we're going to create an organization and we're going to create a movement, and we're going to organize and we're going to fight the system. We're also at the same time going to create this community where we can actually belong and where we can be a part of something, and that we can heal while we mobilize at the same time. So 5 years ago, half a decade, we will turn 5 on August 7th. A lot has changed. We started as an adversary movement. We started as like a challenger that nobody really wanted in this space and thought that we were just here to yell and scream. But actually, here we are 5 years later, and we have very legitimate reasons for doing the things that we've done. And we have moved the system and the community in a lot of ways that I don't know that 5 years ago you would have seen.
So that's part of why I think your voice and your organization are so important, is because you're a disruptor. And I see a lot of the early days of what we created in IAVA and what you're creating in MVA now. And the organization I founded went from kind of being a disruptor and is now almost, some would argue, part of the establishment, right? And now we sit at the table with the VA secretary. They get big grants from established nonprofits. They're professionalized, all that stuff. But the core of what I think is most important right now is your voice and your personal experience and your dynamism. You served as an LGBTQ person under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I want to just focus on that for a moment, if I can, because how did that shape your perspective? Because a lot of folks will leave the military community, will leave the veterans community. You talked about being a commander of the American Legion. I can't think of a more hostile environment in many ways, right? You kind of went into the belly of the beast here after leaving the belly of the beast. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like?
Absolutely. So I served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell all but 3 months. So I literally, I was a part of the military and served under a policy at the Defense Language Institute, where they had done a sting of linguists that were LGBTQ and kicked them out under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I lived in a community that literally feared at all times being criminalized, kicked out, and their lives ruined. And at the same time, I was also trying to serve my country. I was also trying to survive, multiple surgeries. I was medically retired, lived through hell on earth many times over, and didn't have the appropriate support, and always feared that I would be kicked out and my whole life would change and be ruined. When I got out of the military, I didn't know what to do or how to do it. I chose to go back to school, and I kind of lived solo. My mom was a veteran. My family comes from military. So I talk a lot about this 2 parts of your identity, right? That when you serve under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, it's like you create 2 people. One of them is your military self, this the straight white Christian male and everything else is cut off. This uniform that you put on. And there's the queer part of yourself that's liberated and living as a regular person, get to look like this and not be treated differently. And so when you get out, it's you created compartmentalization, but an actual fracture of your identity. I was sitting in a session once with somebody that was teaching a session on the lasting legacy of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I was sitting there listening to her say that it's you have 2 parts of yourself and 2 parts of 2 people, 1 body. And my mind was blown. I was like, wow, I didn't even realize I was doing that there was a veteran part of myself and there was an LGBTQ part of myself. I was only a veteran for a very long time. And I accidentally stumbled into this roundtable with a mayoral candidate here in Washington State. And I thought I was going to be the token veteran, or going to be the token queer on a veteran roundtable. I was actually the token veteran on a queer roundtable. And it broke me. I was so I was I don't know how to be queer. I don't know how to be queer and a veteran. That was the wildest experience. And from there, I really had to basically break this curtain down within myself and with my own identity. I'm divorced. My first wife and I had a very tough relationship, even though we great people, but you create this part of yourself that you can't let somebody into it. So the scars of that policy continue to live in my life. And then you hear other people and it's the same story over and over and over consistently. 2 parts of my identity. I have a divorce. I couldn't keep marriages going. I couldn't keep relationships going. Suicidal ideations. All of these things come from this part of yourself where you served. All you want to do is serve your country. All you want to do is serve the people that you love, but you can't, and it breaks you.
Well, it didn't completely break you, because
it just made me angrier.
Yeah, it made you angry, which is this used to be called Angry Americans. We're fine with that. But it's about turning that anger into positive impact and being stronger at the broken places. And that's what I see now in you. But let me ask you, I feel like every Pride month is different. It's like every 9/11 is different. Every Memorial Day is different. It happens in a different context. It's happening now when extremists are openly threatening and attacking Pride events. It's happening in the backdrop of the January 6th hearings. It's happening as Roe v. Wade is overturned. I want to pull apart a couple of those pieces, but I want to ask you to be Professor Lindsay, if you can. Right? You talked about this Clark Kent super person. I'm not going to say Superman, right? They have this duality, but folks are afraid to ask questions. And I think this community is diverse. Independent Americans talks to a lot of people. Can you break it down for folks and explain what is queer? What is non-binary? Why do you prefer to be called or asked to be called they instead of something else? Can you take us through those 3 pieces as a as a teachable moment, please?
Yeah, let's break it down. All right, so people often talk about this alphabet soup, right? This like ever growing LGBTQIA two spirit. Now, what we're trying to name is every single sexual and gender minority in an acronym. And actually, what we're talking about is sexual orientation and gender identity. Those are the two things within the LGBTQ nomenclature that we're talking about. The reason why I use queer is because my gender identity isn't binary. So lesbian, gay, bisexual means that you identify as man or woman, you are attracted to man or woman. So therefore these binaries exist, but there are many people that are attracted to just a person or understand that like they might be attracted to a trans person, they identify as pan or they identify as queer. For me, being queer is a part of my gender identity and my sexual orientation all wrapped up into one. So my gender identity is non-binary. I don't believe in binaries. I think they're stupid. Boxes that we put ourselves into. I mean, we're sitting here, independent Americans, right? Like think about somebody broke this down and I thought it was the funniest and simplest way to think about it. If California is man and New York is woman, I'm somewhere around Iowa. Like there's this balance and this like I don't believe that binary boxes were meant for us, that we actually created them in the same way that we created race, that we created sexual orientation, gender identity, like all of these things were created to put us in boxes as like as a tactic to like one, societal control, but also like to help us reduce and eliminate fear. And as a non-binary person, I use they and them pronouns because I don't identify as he or she. I love living my life outside of the binary. I love that like I'm not beholden to society's expectations. And I think that binaries need to go away. We put these kids, the same thing I think about kids, right? That we put kids in boxes very quickly and very early. We give them blue, we give them pink, we call them tomboys, we call them sissies, we call them fairies. Like we literally are transphobic to our own kids because we still think that they have to meet these cultural norms. What I actually want to ask people more than what people are asking me is, why does it make sense that you wear pink because you have something between your pants that you should wear pink? Like there's a point of this that like is actually over sexualizing and really inappropriately gendering people based off of what you think is in their pants, which is like the most awkward, weird, strange thing that we do as a culture. And for me, I'm just not going to be complicit in it anymore. I would like to live my life in any way that I can without this rigid expectation of who I am, what I wear, how I talk, what I do, and how I succeed in the world. Let me tell you, it's not that simple. It is definitely the lived experience.
Can I pause you there?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you. Thank you for your grace and your patience in explaining this. But I think it's important for people to have multiple ways to understand this and voices to explain it. And it's a hard question. Like a lot of people, especially conservative independent people, maybe don't want to ask. If you're not in the progressive space, if you're not in the movement space, if some of the language you're using, Lindsay, is new to people when you talk about movement theory and these things that I know from organizing, but are newer to other people, I think it's really important. You're also touching on something really important that I think fits well with this show and this community, which is none of the above. You're taking agency, right? You're saying, yes, I'm going to define myself. I won't be defined by the construct in the same way we've talked with John Updike. It may be a reach, but I don't think it is. You know, you don't have to be bipartisan. You can be nonpartisan. You can be none, yes, of the above. You don't have to choose Democrat or Republican or independent party. You're kind of unaffiliated, right?
Yes.
And politically, I think that's why I wanted to explore this, because I think there is overlap. People who have a very clear or firm or strong or passionate sense of their identity, I think are probably more politically independent too. And I think for a long time it's been assumed that they're going to be Democrats and that the Republicans are going to drive them away, which they have been. But I'm also saying, hey, there's also another option, which is none of the above. And in a time where it seems like, especially in the last 2 weeks, more Democrats are recognizing the inadequacy of the Democratic Party than ever before, this is a moment. So I want to take that conversation forward with you, because Roe has now happened. And I'm going to pause and say, if you hear noise behind me, I'm sorry. My neighbor has decided now to mow the lawn. Welcome to summer in Rykoff land. But I want to ask you, Roe's impact on the military is significant and happening right now. Can you break down for folks what is the immediate impact of Roe being overturned for the military, which is active duty people and our national security, and the veterans community, which is different, which is folks like me and you that are out? Can you break down, in your view, the immediate impact of how Roe is impacting these communities?
Absolutely. I've been trying to break this down for a lot of folks recently, that the Roe falling is one of the biggest threats to national security that we as a country face right now. We already know that recruitment and retention is at an all-time threat. We know that all of the recruiting numbers, the metrics that we define success by, are trending in the wrong direction when it comes to recruitment and retention. You now have service members for the first time in all volunteer history. Women cannot access, and gender minorities cannot access, abortion services for the first time since the all volunteer forces. That's a big piece of history. Now you also have a high concentration of service members stationed in states where they no longer have access, or very soon will have curtailed access or none at all. The Department of Defense only allows for exceptions, right? The TRICARE only covers exceptions of rape, incest, and threat to the life of the mother. It's one thing, we talk a lot about sexual assault and sexual harassment, and the idea that people in the military are disproportionately likely to be sexually assaulted, sexually harassed, and have unwanted pregnancies. And people also don't want to report. So even if you are raped and you have access through TRICARE, information going to service members, access to those services, being believed that you are raped or sexually assaulted, and that's the reason why you're pregnant. You are going to see that 28% of our forces are now going to 28% of our forces, being women, are now going to not have access to the very basic needs that they have. Readiness is going to be diminished. Access for family members, if anybody needs it. So it's not just military, it's also military families. Now, when you look at recruitment and retention numbers, I keep trying to say that 18 to 25-year-old men should actually be as terrified as women getting pregnant, because when you start to see these numbers diminish, you will start to see that the idea of the draft comes back. Now, women tried to appeal to the Supreme Court last year to be included in the draft, and they said absolutely not. So even gender parity in the draft doesn't exist. So when those numbers continue to trend, and let me tell you, organizers will continue to do recruitment stand downs, and it will continue to push that needle, because it's not equitable, it's not safe, and it's not welcoming for our service members. Culture continues to change and continues to want to push those people out. So if you don't like military service, you should be fighting for Roe and the protections that it had, as much as women and gender minorities that can get pregnant.
So I want to pull one piece of that apart, Lindsay. So you're an 18-year-old woman in New York, and you join the Army or the Navy like you did, and you get stationed in Kentucky, right? You don't have the same rights as a service member in the active duty in Kentucky that you do as a civilian in New York, right? And not to mention the morale impact, where people right now are concerned about this. The DoD now has to formulate a response instead of thinking about Russian missiles. It's a massive, wrench in the system at a time when we really can't afford it. So I think the long-term strategic impact on the military, which also will kind of right-wingify the military a little more. Right? Like liberal people are now looking at the military going, well, the military sounds a lot more like Kentucky than it does like California, which I think is also 100%. Really dangerous for the diversity of our recruiting. You've also been really vocal and focused on the Department of Veterans Affairs when folks get out. You had a great Twitter thread that I shared about the things the VA needs to do. And let's talk about that if we can. Go over to the other camp, which is the largest federal healthcare system in America, right? Accessed by tens of millions of people across this country. What is VA getting wrong? And what do they need to do, not just on Roe, because I think that's important, but also more broadly for LGBTQ veterans, since it's Pride and in general we should be talking about. But I want to use the Pride opportunity because you've highlighted it to say, hey, VA keeps talking about how great they are on Pride, but it looks like they're not.
Yeah. So first and foremost, going to abortion, VA has one of the most restrictive abortion laws on record of any federal agency. So already a service member could get out if they were raped or sexually assaulted in the Department of Defense. If they leave the military, they will no longer have access to abortion services, even in the cases of exceptions for on the VA side. So that's number one. Like, service members would not have access if they transitioned. On the Pride side, let's just start this at the very beginning. We don't collect information on sexual orientation and gender identity. It is not mandated. We've been asking for this for years, for them to collect the sheer number of people that have served that are LGBTQ. When you look at the number, how many times have you heard the number 1 million LGBTQ veterans? Like a lot, a lot. Like everybody, every department, every agency uses that number. Do you know that that number dates back to 1999? Do you know that I wasn't even out of the closet at that point? Like I am now a veteran. I wasn't even out of the closet till 2000.
There's plenty of people that weren't born at that time.
Exactly. Like, tell me more about how there are only 1 million LGBTQ veterans, because we are now in a time where service members are the most sexual and gender identity, like diverse that they've ever been. Somehow that number hasn't moved in 20 years. We have no idea even the baseline information about a person's sexual orientation and gender identity. How do you fix a system without even knowing who people are and being able to identify trends in suicide and homelessness and any of the epidemics that we continue to see in our community? We have no idea about what's happening to the LGBTQ community. So data collection is number one. There's also no center for LGBTQ veterans. It's coordinating all of the VA's responses for LGBTQ service members. So it doesn't, there's no actual like coordinated body that's solely responsible for that. There's a Center for Women Veterans, there's a Center for Minority Veterans. There's not an LGBTQ equivalent. There's also no advisory committee that's looking at sexual orientation and gender identity. There's also no gender affirming surgery, though the secretary continues to say we're very close. Every answer, even now, they made the announcement over a year ago. And even now, the answer continues to be really, really close, which is great. But that's not information. You can't make an announcement and continue to make announcements about something that's happening that's not going to happen for another couple of years.
Can we pause there for a second, Lindsay? Because I know there's a lot to work through here. And you're brilliant on this. And this is why I wanted you on the show, because you're expert, probably more than anybody in America, definitely more than most. There's also the bigger issue, which is we can't even get them to change the motto, right? We've talked on this show about there's a VA motto that excludes everybody except men. Right?
Yes.
We have been pushing for that. You know, it's 2 years in the Biden presidency. This has been an easy win right out of the gate, but they're digging in and they're bullshit. There's the feeling that they're just saying they're doing what I call shut the fuck up meetings, where they'll give you, hey, we're working on it. We're working on it. We're come back. And then you're off for 3 months and you're pushed back for 6 months. Now it's going on 2 years, right? Yes. We're going into 3 years and they're not moving the ball on even the easy things. So can I ask you, without getting into details, what's the resistance? Like, you know, where do you think the resistance comes from? Because we know the secretary himself can do it. So I'm going to put it on him and say, Secretary Dennis McDonough can change this. The president can change it. Why do you think those two people haven't changed it?
I honestly, there's a lot of theories that I have in my mind, and I honestly can't come up with one that makes enough sense to have pushed off some of these things so much. You point to the motto, and we've done everything that we're supposed to. And it's like at this point where it's like, okay, so you held meetings on strategic planning with all of the VSOs and asked them for their input on the motto. You did a survey back in March, and we haven't seen any of that data. We've done literally everything that you have asked, and we still see no movement. So the reality of the situation, I can't figure out why we're still here. I can't figure out why, unless it's that the competing priorities of everything else matter more, because we've been yelling and screaming about all of these issues since as long as we've been an organization. My first time testimony, we started in 2017. The first time I testified on abortion rights was 2019. People have been testifying on this stuff for a long time, but nobody wanted to move the needle or move the ball unless it's reactive. It seems as though it was a prior administration or an adversarial administration, we still have to organize, we still have to yell, we still have to push for the things that we shouldn't have to yell about anymore. It shouldn't take that you have completely eliminated our identities from the motto and we have to continue to look at it every single time we walk through for you to understand that it's time to move the motto. But it seems as though we still have to do the thing where we have to yell and scream and prove that this is a problem for them to actually address it. Unless it's in the media, they won't do it on their own.
To explain that point, the motto is on the wall of every building. Mm-hmm. So it's like walking into Starbucks and seeing every time you walk in, there it is. It's not just like a little thing. It's on every building. It's the thing you see that says, you know, for he and for his orphan, right? For him and for his orphan. Doesn't
To care
include
for
any.
him who shall have borne the battle, and his widow and his orphan. Multiple times they tell you that you don't count. You don't exist.
And I want to get onto this from a political standpoint, and then we got to try to blast through a couple other things. But the VA, even more than DOD, seems like the most moderate, maybe even conservative part of the Biden administration. I just want to throw that out because I don't know if you're a Democrat or you're an independent. I know you're obviously active and you have progressive values, but this is a head scratcher. You've got a white guy who's not even of our community, right? There's nothing about us without us. I don't think you could not have, it's literally like putting a Supreme Court justice up there who's never practiced law, or head of education who's never taught, or a secretary of defense who's never served. It's really shocking, and it's a reality, but it seems like the most moderate or even secretly conservative, especially socially or in terms of equity, is the VA. Does that seem right to you?
It does. And also, like, it makes perfect sense when you think about it. The folks that made policy for the Department of Defense moved over as if their career progression was the Department of Veterans Affairs. Same people that made policy for DOD are now the policymakers for VA, or they're the VSOs yelling and screaming. The secretary is beholden to congressionally chartered VSOs. He's actually required to meet with them and hear from them. You're also hearing from the most conservative part of our community on a regular basis. So these ideas, I feel like, are backed up, because even when you ask VSOs within the community, what's your position? What are you willing to do for Roe and to protect women and birthing humans for their reproductive rights? The answer is nothing. The answer is we don't touch that. We don't talk about that. So it makes perfect sense when you think about it, because you have a more moderate VA secretary, or a secretary that's trying to pace themselves, and you have VSOs that are more conservative leaning, pushing them and reiterating that this actually isn't a priority, while we, as like little tiny flies that they would rather see go away, sometimes have to yell and scream and rally our communities for them to even see that we exist.
Okay, so context, if you hear I don't know if folks can hear the lawnmower, but like today
it's like
is
very,
the day.
very
Okay,
tiny.
So there's a lawnmower, and speaking of flies, there's also a fly in my garage. So like, welcome to fucking independent media. But I want to build off of that, because it's also happening in an environment where, the LGBT community is literally being killed, right? The right-wing groups like the Patriot Front have said they will target Pride events. They have targeted Pride events. And the January 6th hearing is happening. We're hearing about the Oath Keepers. You're seeing the mobilization. You see what they look like. There's not a lot of diversity there, right? It's a lot of angry white men who look like a lot of the leaders we see in communities across the country. So can you take a bigger step back? Like, this is a really dangerous environment, but can you talk about what it's like for you personally? Because this Roe is not an abstract thing for you. These threats are not abstract things for you. They impact you and your family. So can you put that into human terms for folks who maybe don't get it or haven't heard it?
Yeah, let me break this down. There's no queer family in the country, I think, that isn't having a really tough conversation right now. I'm married to a beautiful, lovely woman that lives in Richmond, Virginia. I'm not at home, but she is also carrying our first child. So we got married like less than a month after RBG died, because we were terrified we were going to lose our rights, that we were not going to have the right to marriage. Now, here we are 2 years later, and we're having a child in the time that Roe v. Wade falls. And while it may seem like Roe v. Wade falling doesn't impact us because we wanted our child and we literally planned and did all the things, if something happens to my wife, I have to be scared, and we have to figure out how is she going to get the care that she needs. We also live in a state with a constitutional ban against gay marriage. So should anything happen to Obergefell before my child is born, I might not be able to adopt my child. We're literally trying to figure out at this moment whether we stay in the state of Virginia and fight like hell, because that's what I know how to do. That's what I've done my whole life. But now I have a kid. Now I have a child that I don't want to live fleeing. We have to figure out, are we moving to New York? Are we moving to Washington? Or are we moving out of this country? Because there's a hard bit of trauma that you endure when you have to pick up your life out of fleeing, when you are literally fleeing a place and trying to pick up your whole life. I don't want my child to grow up on the run. I'm also in Seattle, Washington. the men in the U-Haul truck, Idaho, just down the street. Do you think that like people were not thinking about that? This year we walked in pride. I carried a Canadian flag because that was like my act of defiance down the streets of Seattle. And I've never seen pride so small since we moved it from Capitol Hill like 15 years ago. People are terrified to go out to pride this year. People were scared to show that they love another human being. That is the state in which we exist, where people are so scared and trying to figure out where it is that we can live that with dignity, agency, ability to like not be terrified walking down the streets. Like, this is 2022 and this is America.
First of all, thank you for sharing all of that, because it's brave in sharing. And I think it's important for people to understand, because I'm having these conversations with friends who are asking me, will my disability benefits from VA work if I'm in another country? Right?
Yes, they will.
Right. Thank you for answering. But folks don't know, right? Can I get my GI Bill benefits if I go to another country? Right? Where am I going to get my health care? And these people are not seditionists. They're the opposite, right? Like, there's going to be some people who say, hey, if you want to fucking go, then go. But they're not understanding the reason why people are considering going is because this is a Handmaid's Tale moment where literally rights are being stripped around you as you're building a family, as you're existing. And I think that's an important humanization of these issues that people are still not fully grasping. Your wife is expecting. This could change during your pregnancy and your marriage could be voided and made illegal. Like, that is fucking crazy and outrageous and un-American. And it's amazing that you're still fighting back. But let me ask you this. There's a lot of folks who are going to be listening who are in situations like you, or have family members who are in situations like you, who maybe are checking their passport, maybe have their bag packed, maybe are moving to a different state. I know you can't, tell them what to do, but as an activist and as a leader for this movement, what's your message to those people that are now, in some ways going to be like behind, it's going to feel like they're behind enemy lines. What's your message for them in this moment and in the next couple of months ahead, which look like they could be even tougher?
First and foremost, get an attorney. Literally, that's what, like all of us need to be doing right now, is figuring out what are our rights. You know what? I mean, I was in a hearing just recently and I listened to a Republican congressman yell about how Roe v. Wade was actually empowering women and like giving them all the things. And I said, there's nothing more empowering than knowing your rights. And knowing your rights is the one thing that like will save us in our moments, that as long as we know our rights, we have more power than we think that we do. So one, know your rights, talk to an attorney, figure out how do you protect yourself and your family, your assets, your children, your marriage. Also too, like it is okay to leave a state. I've been going through this back and forth, and like, I'm a fighter. I cannot help but fight. But I also like, living in America is inherently traumatic if you live in communities that are oppressed, marginalized, and targeted. You don't have to stay. You're not beholden to a state that does not believe that you have human dignity and doesn't see you as a person. So if you are thinking about leaving and you're worried and you're feeling the like guilt and the shame of that, it's okay, walk away. And it's okay to stay and fight. And if you're going to stay and fight, find your community, find your people, and find a way to organize. Don't try to do it yourself, because you cannot change the system by yourself. Don't be an activist, be an organizer. Be an organizer, because activists only have one person. They are one person among many. Organizers have many people behind them and a solid message to move forward. So if you're going to stay and fight and organize with other people and find your people, because the one thing that we cannot forget in this life is we fight like hell, but we fight for joy. And we fight for the right and to experience that joy. So never forget that we are fighting for that joy.
It's like we're talking about the French resistance here, and it's what we see people in Ukraine having to deal with. But now it's here. Like, this is our version of this next generation war, and it's for the soul of the American conscience and the body politic and our future. And we're talking about a resistance, like a political resistance. It's okay to leave, the Donbass region and go back and consolidate, reorganize, find new ways to get your power, and then come back later and take it back, right? And I think that's the long view that is hard to have, especially when you have children. I think I may have mentioned this on Twitter, but I wanted to go to Pride this weekend. And we've been to Pride a lot with the kids. And my wife and I had a conversation. She said, we got a 3-year-old, and it's not just an attack. It could be a stampede, like we saw. People saw fireworks. Crowds are now not safe, and especially crowds where there are gatherings of gay people or minority people or any people is now a target. Like everything's a soft target. So,
and you can open carry in those places now too.
Right.
Thank you, Supreme Court.
Right. So to that point, I'm glad you mentioned it. Supreme Court just ruled before we got to recording in the case of Torres versus Texas Department of Safety. Torres was a cop who sued after being fired. He had a burn pit exposure. He's been on TV. This is a 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court that, they got Kavanaugh and I think one other to come over with the liberals. And then you've got Scalia, Thomas, and Amy Coney Barrett, and one other in the dissent.
Alito.
It's Alito. Thank you. It's a 5-4 decision. This is interesting because I said to you before we started recording, it's the one time where a conservative court might favor, a minority community because it's veterans, right? It's like this weird blind spot where, okay, you can't get Alito, but you're going to get Roberts, right? On an issue of minority rights on disabled people, right? This is a big fucking deal. Like, it's a massive win for veterans, not just this generation, but Agent Orange and everyone else who has suffered because of their service. Quick reactions from you on this decision. Maybe it's one good piece of news after a string of shitty ones over the next couple of months, but what's your immediate reaction, Lindsay, to the decision?
So I looked this up, and this law actually existed because of Vietnam. So then it's good. The law dates back to like the 1970s to protect veterans because of the Vietnam era veterans that were removed from their jobs. It's actually quite interesting to me because I think being in the military, the Ferris Doctrine, which protects the government from ever being sued for any wrongdoing that they've done to service members and veterans. So I actually find it fascinating that now there's a state that set precedent that you can't discriminate against people, or that you can't dismiss people because of their veteran status and their disability status. So I'm actually curious to see if this will set up more ability for veterans to be able to leverage state cases, because we have no power when it comes to the federal government. So what happens from here, the trickle down, is going to be really interesting. And it's also fascinating because the same folks that voted before were ones that wanted to make sure that folks in the National Guard didn't have to get vaccines. So like the level of like kind of cognitive dissonance of and the hypocrisy of it all is really surfacing in the sense that like it doesn't make any sense that you are like anti-vaccine but like pro these it's
a really important, in many ways it's going to be the most interesting case out of the recent ones, right? Because it was the least expected, the least understood, the least covered, but it also might be a pathway forward on some issues. I don't know. I mean, the no shit too is going to be a torrent of cases now. The personal injury attorneys are going to be backing up the dump trucks for every single case, and veterans are all going to be throwing us out. And I worry actually about the backlash against veterans, because it's going to make them look litigious, and people aren't going to say it to their face, but they're not going to hire them because they're worried they could have a burn pit exposure that they have to accommodate, and it just, with a recession coming, it could be another cost that people don't want to undertake. So I think it's a fascinating moment. I know Jon Stewart's trumpeting it while we're also fighting on burn pits. Let me ask you to bring it back to center with a final question, Lindsay. And I know you've agreed to graciously stick around for our Patreon members. So thank you to them for sticking through this episode. If we had technical problems, my apologies. Lindsay, you've been so enlightening. It's Independence Day. This is independent Americans. We say it's Independence Day, but it's also Independence Day. My kids and I were talking about it, and I like July 4th. Like, I love July 4th because I love this country, and it's our country's birthday, right? And for me, it's always been a holiday worth celebrating, but this is a complicated time. And it's kind of like, I look at it like my kid. Like, you might not like my kid, but I'm going to celebrate my kid the way I want to celebrate my kid, because I own this flag too, and I own this country too. And in my own little orbit, I want to make it something that is positive, and that is unifying, and that is about the future. And then for me, in that orbit, it's about teaching my kids what it's about, right? What are your thoughts on this Independence Day, and the last Independence Day when you won't be a parent, everything else that's going on?
The July 4th has always been a complicated one for me, just in general, ever since I got out of the military, just because military service was complicated for me. The last couple of years have been even more complicated. So you're familiar with Vanessa Guillen, the murder of Vanessa Guillen. This is actually
Can I
tomorrow.
pull on that for a second? Vanessa
Yes,
Guillen
please.
was an active duty soldier that was sexually assaulted and murdered at Fort Hood, right? Yeah.
Yes. Her body was discovered 2 years ago tomorrow. 4th of July 2020, a group of organizers came together to create a Justice for Vanessa Guillen grassroots campaign. We have spent, communities who have marginalized, oppressed, brutalized, victimized have been spending this Independence Day organizing for years. And I call on Americans to do the same. If you want this country to be what it says that it professes to be, spend 4th of July organizing, figuring out how you're going to fight for Americans that are now marginalized, disenfranchised, disempowered. Spend your 4th of July fighting for this country, because guess what? This country doesn't maintain its own freedom. It's maintained by people who continue to put the work in. So you love 4th of July, spend the 4th of July organizing, spend the 4th of July fighting for freedom.
Yeah. This is why I hope you run for something. I really do. Like, I have this vision of the future where you're in the Senate or somewhere else. And I think it's entirely, it's something we should all root for. I mean, again, it doesn't matter what your party is. I think, you're a voice that's cracking through, and you're a conscience, and you're the best kind of patriot. We've seen a lot of people cannibalize the word patriot, and I think there's an opportunity for leaders like you to reclaim it, especially in this moment. And I'm just grateful for you. I mean, leadership is so fucking hard, and what you've been through is unimaginable. But you keep fighting and you keep inspiring, and you're a personal hero of mine. And I'm so grateful that you've spent so much time today talking through so much. You're also a wizard in being able to do it. So thank you for all that you do. Congratulations to you and your wife on the baby.
Thank you so much.
Happy Pride. And I think it's a good transition to go from Pride into July 4th, because we got to kind of take that energy and keep it going. And you're going to be on the ramparts for that. So you're one of my favorite Americans. Thank you for joining us on the show, Lindsay.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just so grateful for everything. Thank you.
All right. So hopefully beers, fireworks, maybe we'll go to a Seattle Seahawks game sometime soon.
The Seahawks would love it. Let's go. They're 12th man. We're here for it. Let's go.
All right. Stay vigilant. Thank you.
Thanks.